Apertura en Europa. Brian O'Reilly es el responsable de Estrategia de Mercado de Mediolanum International Funds Limited. Brian, good morning.
Good morning.
There are concerns about the global economy that is slowing. How worried are you?
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously clear signs that the global economy is slowing, and we can see this particularly so in Europe, given the issue with energy prices, and some are even worried that we're heading for a recession. We're still in this really unusual situation that we're still coming out of COVID. There's a lot of pent-up demand, consumers are spending. We still have a lot of supply and imbalances around the world, particularly with China continuing with its zero COVID policy. And of course, we're facing, the first energy crisis since the 1970s and inflation running at high single digits. And we're beginning to see that reflected in confidence surveys, both business and consumer confidence surveys. People are obviously very worried about the future, and the concern is that's going to impact spending. And I think all of that is understandable, but I'd also highlight some of the positives. I mean, consumers are still spending. Retail sales remain quite strong. The labour market, as I'm sure in Spain as it is here in Ireland, it's very hard to find casual workers for restaurants, hotels, etc. So the labour market is still quite strong. And we still have a lot of savings built up during COVID. And none of them are consistent with the fears that we're heading into an imminent recession. So it's a very mixed picture at the moment. Ultimately, we do need to see inflation ease. And that's ultimately what we're seeing with central banks around the world, whether it be the Federal Reserve speech last week with Jackson Hole, or expectations for what the ECB may do with interest rates at their next meeting in September.
Inflation is running at a very high level in Europe. How do you see it evolving?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the area of most concern at the moment. I mean, only this week we had, data that said CPI, or consumer price inflation in Europe, breached 9%. I mean, who would have thought that, 5 or even 10 years ago when we were dealing with the Eurozone debt crisis? But it's a global phenomenon. We're seeing similar levels of inflation in the US as well. So that is the area of concern, but there's different types of inflation coming through. The main cause of inflation in Europe is energy prices. So obviously oil and gas soaring again, with Russians limiting gas supplies to the Nord Stream pipeline. But when we dig a little bit deeper and we look at core inflation, stripping out energy, inflation in the Eurozone is running at around 4%. So still relatively high, but nowhere near the 9% headline figure. It is very difficult to see a resolution anytime soon. I think we can take some encouragement that the EU and the European Commission are actually looking at capping energy prices and implementing windfall taxes on energy companies. I think that can help ease some of the burden. But ultimately, we don't expect inflation to begin to moderate into 2023. So that's going to leave a very difficult winter, I think, for a lot of households across the continent.
Do you think that 75 basis points in the next meeting, the next week for the European Central Bank, could be the best options to reduce the inflation?
Certainly that is becoming the consensus. The market has already begun to price in 75 basis points by the ECB and another 0.5% in October. So that will take base rates above 2% for the first time in a very, very long time. Personally, I think it would be a policy mistake. As I said, interest rates are a very blunt tool to combat inflation. But banks are certainly getting tougher on inflation. We saw that last week with Jerome Powell's speech at Jackson Hole. But interest rates won't resolve the energy crisis. Ultimately, we need to see more supply come on stream. But certainly, I don't think we can rule out a 75 basis point increase by the ECB, albeit I think that would be a policy mistake, given the root cause of inflation is energy.
How do you see European economy performing compared with the China?
So again, it's a very mixed picture. On the one hand, the Chinese economy is still operating at COVID-type levels due to its zero COVID policy. Even this week in Chengdu, a population of 20 million, they began to lock down that again in terms of COVID. So China's really struggling at the moment. We do expect the Chinese economy to accelerate later this year as the government try to prime the economy to get things moving again. The US, as usual, is in a much better situation, albeit it's dealing with pretty high inflation. But just this week, we had data showing that there were over 11 million jobs, positions to be filled in the US. So again, really strong economy there. Europe is the area we're most concerned about at the moment due to the high energy prices. And again, ultimately, we need to see inflation begin to fall before we could get constructive on the Eurozone economy.
Thank you very much for your analysis, Brian O'Reilly, responsable de Estrategia de Mercado de Mediolanum International Funds Limited. Good day, good business.
Thank you.
9:03 de la mañana, abre el mercado muy leve al alza, pero muy leve, y cae, sin embargo, el desempleo